What if the very part of you you're hiding is the key to your next level of power? Hi, this is Greg Swanson. Welcome to Warrior Mind Podcast number 729, where we're going to be talking about decoding the warrior's shadow self, unleashing your hidden power. You know, every warrior has a shadow. It's not a flaw, but it's a force. It follows you into the boardroom, to the gym, on your dates, to the battlefield of your mind. It follows you everywhere, wherever you go. And it's not that little children's song, I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, although it's very similar to that. But you can try to outrun it with success, smother it with positivity, or silence it with busyness and other perhaps unhealthy avenues. But the shadow self doesn't disappear. It waits, and it waits, and it waits. And when left unexamined, it sabotages everything you've worked for. Yes, everything. So if you keep repeating a cycle of either making money, losing it, making money, losing it, get in a relationship, lose it, get in a relationship, lose it, have weight, lose the weight, go back. Most likely, there is part of your shadow self that's playing a very important role in this demise. You know, Carl Jung was a student of Sigmund Freud, called the shadow the parts of ourselves we've rejected, buried, or refused to own. Now, I want to make it clear that the shadow is not the bad parts. There are good parts of us. There are some powerful parts of us where we have suppressed it, like, oh, I'm not good enough, and you really are good enough, and there's other parts of it. So the shadow isn't just all the negative traits. It can be those positive traits that we refuse to acknowledge and accept. You know, there can be artists out there who go, oh, it's not that good, it's not that good. And they become a starving artist because their shadow self says they're not that good. So when we're talking about the shadow here, it's not just those things that are unattractive or disempowering. It's those things that are empowering as well. You know, but here's the truth. High performers hate to admit it's not the external pressure that breaks you. It's the internal suppression that is suppressing the shadow self. And this is such a complex topic that the purpose of this podcast is just to get you exposed to the concept so that when you coach with me or another coach, this topic won't seem foreign to you. And there's many books on it. There's many workshops. There's many things to do about the shadow self. But the first thing is to be aware, one, that we all have it, and kind of a little bit of background on its purpose, if you will. So what is the shadow self? Coined again by Carl Jung, that's the hidden, denied parts of your psyche. Again, they can be those empowering parts or those disempowering parts. You know, it contains repressed emotions, instincts, and behaviors. Those repressed emotions could be you did something great and you excited and you laughed and you screamed and you had a great time and you were told to be quiet. And every time you did something well, you celebrated and you were told to be quiet. Well, then eventually you learned it's not good to celebrate, so I'm going to repress those emotions. So you get something that you wanted and you go, oh, it's no big deal. I don't feel anything. Well, you do feel it, but it's been suppressed. So that is an example of a positive emotion, right? Celebrating. So the shadow self contains these repressed emotions, instincts, and behaviors. You know, for high achievers, it's often disguised as overworking, perfectionism, or even rage, right? That rage of we want to get something done, or the person's not responding back to us, or our subordinate is doing something that we think is wrong, and we blow up at them, when in reality we're looking at that person or looking at the situation through the eyes of that shadow self. You know, the shadow isn't evil, it's just unconscious power. We're not really aware of the shadow until it erupts. When we hold ourselves back, you know, from positive aspects, or when we dive into this ruthless tyrant rage, that is also part of the shadow. Suppressing it leads to fragmentation, not schizophrenia. Don't worry about that. What we're talking about is there's this bipolar, and I'm putting that in quotes, but it's at one point we're great, at one point we're not. We suppress these emotions, then we blow them up, and then we suppress them and blow them up. And when we keep trying to stuff these emotions down, again, whether it's a positive or a negative, eventually they have to come out. And they usually come out after a certain amount of time when we've repressed them. So that leads to that fragmentation. Suppressing sabotages success, because we need to use all of our conscious, our unconscious mind for success. And the unconscious is where these shadow self hides in the psyche. So if we suppressing this, it's going to sabotage, right? Repressed traits become blind spots. We don't see that we're blowing up. We don't see that we're angry. We don't see that we're not acknowledging our success. We don't see this stuff. Everybody points it out to them. We think that they're just blowing smoke up our butt. But in reality, it creates blind spots. The shadow projection ruins relationships and team dynamics. There's an expression that perception is projection. So when we project our shadow self, we can project it on somebody, one of our partners, part of us that is maybe not that confident. And our partner is confident. And then we start telling them that they're boasting, they're egotistical, and they're this and that. And that's because we're projecting our suppressed shadow self on them, and then we can get into these arguments. And the same thing happens with a team dynamic. And so not every time you have an emotion is it the shadow, but here's a good indication. If your emotional response is disproportionate to the event, it's usually the shadow. So, somebody opens a door for you and you blow up. Why do you think? I'm an invalid, blah, 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 right? You get all that. That would probably be a sign that the shadow is showing up. So we have emotions, right? We're human. We have to have emotions. And we have emotions normally when we're healthy with our emotional intelligence. We have emotions that are at the same or a little bit less than the event. But when our emotions are so disproportionate to the event, that's a really good sign that the shadow has shown up. And this leads to burnout, imposter syndrome, and fear-based decisions. There's so many ways the shadow part, it creeps into all these parts of ourself. The burnout because we're overworking, because we think we're lazy, because of the shadow self is saying that, your parents were lazy, so you have to work harder. Imposter syndrome. There's all sorts of ways this shows up. And again, just because you work 12 hours a day, it doesn't mean that the shadow has taken over your life. But we want to see if it's how you address that burnout. If somebody says, hey, you're reaching burnout, take some time off, how do you respond to that? That would be a great indication of where the shadow is playing a role. Suppressing splits the psyche, right? It weakens clarity and courage. When our psyche is split because of the shadow, right? So the shadow is part of us, again, that we have buried, but it is still part of us. But until we accept it, it is split in our psyche. And again, it's not schizophrenia, but it's part of it that is buried and we don't see it. So it is two different parts of us, right? We have that shadow part and then our normal part. And what we want to do is integrate the shadow part into the normal part, so we have this normal unconscious mind that works with our conscious mind. And it takes a lot of work. And like I said, there's workshops out there, there's therapy, there's coaching, there's so many things about it. But again, we want to just be aware. Look at some of these red flags that come up. And so integration is really the key to strength. Integrating that shadow self, not saying that I'm a bully and being a bully, but understanding where that bully shadow self is coming from. Maybe it's insecurity. And when you admit that you were insecure back then, but you're not anymore, then there's some integration that can take place, right? Integration equals bringing awareness to the hidden parts. And usually, again, if we have a disproportionate emotional response to a situation, that's a perfect opportunity to start following that trail back to the hidden parts and ask, what is this trying to tell me? What is this trying to show me? And therapy can work great. Coaching can work great with this, but we want to be like a detective, and we're finding the trail. We find these breadcrumbs, and we want to go back to find those hidden parts so we can communicate with them through visualization and some other aspects. But we want to go there and talk to those hidden parts and bring them into the light. Reclaiming energy, emotional mastery, and confidence. This is what happens after you integrate that shadow self into your psyche. Inner alignment enhances decision making and resilience. If you're ever stuck with, should I do this, should I do that? We all have decision phobia sometimes, but when it happens so constantly and you're not even aware of it, it's usually that shadow part that wants to make a decision, and the other part wants to make a decision. So you have these two parts, and they're fighting about, should I eat this cake or should I lose weight? Should I go to this job or should I just stay here and work overtime? Right? Those are hypotheticals, and those aren't great examples, but they are examples of decision making. And then the resilience is just keep pushing through instead of quitting, right? You are only as strong as the parts of yourself you don't deny. And there are many, many, many ways of accepting, uncovering, embracing, and utilizing those parts of yourself into your psyche. And again, if it's a negative one, there is always a positive aspect to it. And so the key isn't just to find the negative part of it and then destroy it. It's like, what is that negative part protecting? And then looking at what that protected part is, and that's where the light comes in, and that's where the good parts of you are, and then you bring those into your psyche, right? So becoming a conscious warrior, right? A conscious warrior embraces all aspects, light and shadow. And this may sound like a contradiction, embracing the shadow, meaning keeping the shadow, but actually when you embrace all aspects, light and shadow, the shadow then becomes the light. And not the old TV movie Poltergeist, go into the light, children, but this is a different light that we're talking about. And this begins with awareness, acceptance, and inquiry, awareing of how you are responding to certain situations. And it might not even be emotionally disproportionate, but how you hold your back, how you don't hold your back. Maybe you're just put you out there so much that it's obnoxious. Well, what is that covering up? And maybe you don't put yourself out there enough and you're struggling for business. Well, what is that covering up? So we want to be aware of those behaviors, and then we want to look at where they go, accept it. We accept it through the inquiry of, what am I being taught here? And then the benefits are inner peace, authentic leadership, and unshakable self-trust. This is what happens when you become a conscious warrior, by working with that shadow self. And the true strength is wholeness, not performance, because you can perform very well and then crash, and those would be the shadow selves. A lot of musicians used to go through that. I'm not too sure anymore, but in my time, that shadow self would come up and just destroy them. So it wasn't the performance, it's the wholeness that is the strength. So here's some practical tools to integrate the shadow, right? Shadow journaling prompts. What did I judge harshly in others? How does that reflect in me, right? Journaling is, going back on a specific situation that you had and inquiring about, what did I judge? What really did I judge about them that I may be hiding in myself? Well, that person is loud and boisterous. Well, maybe that's because you may be quiet and shy, and you take that's your shadow self, and you take offense to somebody who is confident. And so we could draw that down to embracing that confidence. So journaling helps a lot. Archetype work, right? Carl Jung pretty much established the archetypes. And for men, you'd want to work with your warrior, your king, your magician, and your lover archetype. When I coach with men, this usually always comes up. Even if I'm coaching with men in business, it comes up. With relationships, it comes up. With personal development, it comes up. But you want to work on the archetype, because those archetypes have a light and a dark side, or a shadow side, right? The king can be great, or it can be a tyrant. right? And the magician can be evil or it can be a good magician. So we want to work on those as well. NLP reframing, right? Turn internal critics into internal coaches. So when you hear a voice of a critic, we want to transfer that voice and the statements into questions. And that can be done very easily as well. And then there's mirror work, breath work, dream analysis. Like I said, there's so many ways to work with your shadow. I would look at maybe contacting me, contacting another coach, and just start having that inquiry. It's interesting. When this happens, I respond this way. When this happens, I feel this way. See if it's shadow, see if it's not. Whatever it is, it's going to help you, right? It's going to help, no doubt about it. So here's some final thoughts, right? Most men are chasing success while dragging an invisible anchor, the shadow self they've never learned to face. So it feels like drudgery. They're just going and something blows up and here we go again. Why is this always happening to me? Those are signs of the shadow self. So it shows up as burnout, broken relationship, misaligned goals, and the endless feeling that something is missing. And that missing part is that lack of integration into our whole psyche is part of that shadow self. Even when everything looks good on paper, we still feel empty, right? But here's the truth. The parts of you you've rejected are not your weaknesses. They are actually really your strengths. And we can become, I'm going to say afraid, quote unquote, of our strengths. So we suppress them. They are your untapped strength. So what I would offer is, you're listening to this, go ahead and book your power strategy session call today, and let's dive into this a little bit deeper with yourself. If you want to see the show notes on this podcast, you can visit warriormindcoach.com. While you're over there, you can find some more useful information in the form of blog posts and podcasts, and how to schedule that free consultation session. Since you'll be on the internet, please follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, all under Warrior Mind Coach.